you who don't know me, my name is Steve Schwartz. I run the LSAT blog, and I also host the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel and podcast. And if you could do me a favor and use the chat function on the side here to let me know when you're taking the LSAT and if you've taken it before, that would be really helpful, just so I can use that to orient this conversation appropriately around your needs and your questions. The July LSAT's coming up in just a few weeks, and I know June LSAT scores just came back yesterday. So we've got a mix of things going on right now. A lot of folks are looking towards July. A lot are looking towards September. But of course, my recommendations are going to be different if you're taking July versus September. And so we want to orient it accordingly. I actually see a few folks looking for a mix of July and September. Some people are taking both or registered for both. Some are doing July or September or beyond. That's good to know. I'll try to cover concerns around both of those test dates and then even beyond. I also regularly hold free LSAT classes here in New York City, and I'll include the link for you to that as well. Now, for those of you who got your scores back just yesterday and are thinking of retaking in July or beyond, I want you to think about what you're going to do differently next time around. I did teach an online class on retaking, and it's on YouTube now. I'll share the link with you here. But I want to share just quickly some thoughts on retake strategies, because even if you aren't retaking this time, you don't know how July or September will turn out. You may end up retaking that as well. So some thoughts on retaking. First off, there is value in redoing prep tests, even ones you've seen before. I'm getting emails from people practically every day saying to me, I've done every LSAT ever. I've seen every reading comp passage, every game, every logical reasoning question. What do I do now? And my answer is, are you getting perfect on everything? If you're not getting perfect on everything, even if you've seen the material 2, 3, 4, 5 times, that suggests you really don't know it and you're really missing something. Because after all, if you've seen the correct answer before, but you're still getting it wrong, there must be some gap in your understanding, or at least you keep being tempted by the same wrong answers. So redo problems. It's extraordinarily useful. The value in doing LSAT problems or even doing full-length timed exams is not simply to measure yourself or to see where you currently stand. That's nice to have, but it's really to better understand the material. So don't be afraid to redo problems. Then I would also ask you, have you really done every single LSAT exam ever released? There are 86 numbered exams currently. June will be exam number 87. Plus there is the June 07 LSAT, Super Prep exams A, B, and C. There's also C2 in the Super Prep 2 book. There's an out-of-print official LSAT prep test with explanations. There are copies available on Amazon as well that are used but still out there. And so I'm sharing with you a link to the LSAT prep tests if you want to see some that you may have missed before. I don't want you to go to fake LSAT practice tests, though, like fake practice exams published by companies like Barron's, for example, or in Kaplan's old retail books. They were using fake LSAT questions. They're not realistic. They often contain mistakes or typos. If a book doesn't say the actual official prep test number and the date it was administered, it's probably not real. And those who do license exams from LSAC are paying big licensing fees to do so. And so if they are, they will brag about it on the cover. If you're not sure about an exam, a prep test book or an exam book, just email me the link and I'll let you know what I think. Or you could also look at the comments or reviews below that book on Amazon. When you're looking to retake or when you're looking to overcome a score plateau, you want to identify your weaknesses. Even if the exam wasn't released, I think July is not going to be released. It doesn't matter. You still just simply want to look at the most recent 3 to 5 exams you've recently done under realistic timed conditions, or not, either way. Your most recent exams that you've completed, your errors there will give you a sense of what your weak areas are and where to focus on moving forward. By the way, don't just look at the ones you got wrong. Also look at the ones that you got right but guessed on. You were down to 2. Maybe you got lucky, but it could have just as easily gone the other way next time around. So make sure that you're looking at all the ones you have difficulty with. And then as you're reviewing, you want to see, was your problem in the stimulus or passage? Was it in identifying the question stem, or was it in the answer choices? If it was in the stimulus, was it identifying the conclusion or evidence or subconclusion or counter premise, anything like that? Slow down, make sure you understand the stimulus thoroughly. Or alternatively, was it in the wording of the question stem, or was it in the answer choices? If it was in the answer choices, what was tempting about the wrong answer that made you pick it? What ultimately makes it wrong? Or what was discouraging about the right answer choice that pushed you away from it? And what ultimately makes it correct? You want to engage in that process again and again and again to spot the patterns in what you specifically are getting wrong, because there are thousands of tricks the LSAT test makers may use, and you're not presumably falling for all of them, or else you'd be getting a 120. You're only falling for certain mistakes. And so the key is figure out what your unique mistakes are so that you will be able to avoid making them in the future. As far as retakes are concerned, you want to look at what you're going to do differently this time around in terms of your schedule for studying, your resources, what courses you're using. If you've just been using random free blog posts and forums and looking online for Facebook groups and things like that, you may want something a little bit more organized and comprehensive moving forward. So just consider what you might be doing differently next time around in the future. And by the way, speaking of study schedules, I do want to share with you a link to some free ones I've put together here in the chat here, to a link of study plans. There are some free ones, some paid ones. The bottom line is that you've got to have some plan of attack. If you didn't take the time to learn the basics before, look at next time around what you could do differently to build that foundation. I recommend a 5-stage process to structuring your LSAT self-study. I call it the laser approach to studying. It involves learning first, then accuracy, then sections, then exams, then review. Learning is theory, building your foundation, just reading about different LSAT problem types. Next is accuracy, doing individual questions, perhaps by type, working from easy to moderate difficulty to the hardest. Next is sections, to work on your pacing, doing 35-minute timed sections. Fourth is exams and endurance, doing full-length 5-section timed exams. Finally is review, which I covered a little bit previously. Now, if you've already learned the basics, you want to ID your weak areas, focus on those, and mix in a timed exam or 2 per week. Don't worry too much about the specifics. Timed exams, questions by type, they're all good. Now, you've got 3 months until the September LSAT. So if you've got the time, go for that. Otherwise, you've got 4 months till October or beyond. November, you have plenty of time moving forward. Now, July, of course, we have the digital LSAT just 2 weeks away, starting this transition period. You want to be aware, of course, if you are taking July, you probably know half of test takers will get the digital format, half get the paper and pencil. LSAT chooses for you. You're not going to know in advance, which is considered for some reason a best practice when transitioning to a new testing format. The benefit, though, of July is twofold. One is that you can see your score before deciding whether to cancel. Secondly, if you do cancel, you get a free retake on a future LSAT administration, October through April of 2020, which is pretty nice. So for July, basically be ready for anything either paper or digital. Then, of course, September will be fully digital. This does only apply to North America. Those overseas will still be getting the paper for at least a few years. Now, in terms of next level preparation, let's say you're the kind of person who's done every LSAT ever released and you don't want to redo them for whatever reason and you're looking for a top score. You could consider writing your own LSAT style questions, your own games, your own reasoning questions, or maybe your own supplemental simply answer choices to actual official LSAT problems, just as an exercise to help you see the exam from the test maker's perspective. I certainly learned a lot when I wrote my own LSAT logic games. I'm sharing a link to those for you here. And then in terms of writing out your own thought process, writing out your own LSAT explanations, I'm sharing a link for that as well. I know I've said a lot on retakes. Happy to entertain questions on that before I move on to something else. Someone else was asking about the paid courses. Are they the same as my old ones? No, they're not. My new courses include digital LSAT prep specifically, and they also include recordings of my live online LSAT master classes, my live weekend LSAT master classes, and Q&A sessions. And so it includes a lot more than the old versions of the courses from several years ago. They're totally updated for the digital LSAT specifically. In terms of a study plan for the July LSAT specifically, of course, we have just over 2 weeks until then. And so I'm not going to recommend a totally new approach. What I would recommend focusing on now, if your timeline is pretty short, just 2 weeks or so away, is focusing on timed exams and detailed review of those exams. Real review takes time. It's not enough to simply look at the correct answer and say, oh, I get it now, and then move on from there. You have to look at specifically what made you pick the wrong answer in the moment and what ultimately makes it wrong, and what pushed you away from the right answer or made the right answer seem unappealing, and what ultimately makes it correct. If you have 10 questions you got wrong on an exam, and then another 15 that you guessed on, we're down to 2, we're not sure, but got lucky and got it right, and you weren't maybe 100% confident in those, that's 25 questions that are worth reviewing. And that could easily take 3 to 4 hours or more if done properly, which in my opinion is close to a full day of study, because I wouldn't really recommend studying more than 4 or 5 hours in a day, maybe 6 if you're studying full time and have nothing else to do and you're taking plenty of breaks. But this involves simply just not being on the internet, not being on your phone, focus study, get it out of the way and move on. I know, of course, that the college semester just ended a few weeks ago. We're now solidly into the summer. And so for those of you who are lucky enough to be in the position of being able to study full time, I'll give you some thoughts on structuring that. Let's say you wake up maybe 8 a.m., sun rises early this time of year. You wake up 8 a.m. or so, you start studying at 9, study from 9 to 12 noon, take a break for lunch, study from 1 to 4, and that's your day. Before that, you could be working out, eating breakfast, showering. After that, see friends, go for a walk. It's all good, but more than 6 hours a day does lead to burnout. I've seen it happen far too many times, and so I would recommend taking frequent breaks. There's a great technique for getting work done called the Pomodoro technique, Pomodoro, really useful. Just basically studying or doing work in chunks and then taking scheduled breaks. So at least you know, don't take a break to check your email now just because that problem's hard. Wait until your predefined break and check your email then, if that's what you want to do. There's a great app called the Focus app that implements the Pomodoro technique on your smartphone. It can help you structure your breaks and your study time. I saw someone raise their hand to ask a question. Feel free to just ask it either in the chat or using the Q&A function. I'll be happy to work it into this conversation. Now, in terms of a schedule specifically in the week leading up to the exam, it's basically taking these 5-section, not 4, timed exams and reviewing, or maybe doing a few timed practice sessions. Let's say if you're working and you're not able to fit in a full exam, just doing a few sections or maybe 2 back-to-back or 3 back-to-back is totally good. I'm going to share a link here to a recommended schedule for leading up to the July LSAT, just breaking it down from July 10th through July 15th. Someone else recommended another app for focusing called the Forest app. So check that out. I haven't heard of it, but maybe that's a good one too. Someone asked about taking, what do I have to say to those who are taking prep test classes? I assume you're just referring to taking prep classes in general. I think prep classes can be really useful and they probably won't hurt you. Obviously, some prep classes are better than others, and a lot depends on the instructor as well. So I'd say more important in the particular prep company that you're using is the instructor you're working with. If you're considering an in-person prep class or even an online one, try to sit in on a sample class with the instructor to make sure that you like their style and make sure that they know what they're doing, of course. I recommend only working with people who scored in the top LSAT scores, specifically the 99th percentile, which is typically a 173 or above. That really indicates mastery of the material. And also you want to make sure it's a real official LSAT administered LSAT, not one proctored by the student themselves, the teacher themselves, or by the prep company themselves, because the stakes are not as high when it's not the real thing. So make sure that they've taken a real official LSAT administered LSAT under test day conditions where it really counts. As far as methodologies from particular university courses, I'm not really too familiar with the specifics of those, so I can't speak to that. But of course, ideally those who are teaching full-time, not someone who's just a current law student kind of passing through or somebody doing this on the side. I think someone who specializes in this is really the way to go. And by the way, in general, LSAT prep companies that specialize in the LSAT exclusively are typically on average better than those that teach everything under the sun. So for example, Kaplan teaches the GMAT, the MCAT, the GRE, the LSAT, the SAT, the ACT. Their instructors have not scored the 99th percentile. There are better options out there. A lot of the boutique LSAT prep companies specialize exclusively in the LSAT. And so that's where they're focusing their curriculum development, and their instructors specialize in that. So that's really where I would recommend focusing your prep if at all possible. In general, let's say you're not studying full-time, and let's say you're working or you're in school taking summer classes, or you have a part-time job or an internship, whatever it may be. In that case, you want to carve out study time before work or school, on the weekends, and after class as well. So maybe during your lunch break if you're working, or at work in your office before you go home. Let's say the workday ends at 5 or 5:30. Don't go home and then put on your PJs and turn on Netflix. Instead, stay at the office or find a coffee shop nearby, bring your books with you, keep your work outfit on, and carve out at least 1 or 2 hours of study after work before you go home. Similarly, you could get to work early and carve out that study time before you actually start the workday. Maybe, let's say you're a paralegal, you can find a conference room at work, or either way, find a coffee shop nearby and get there early with your books, get a few hours out of the way. Then during lunch, maybe you could take a break and get it done then. But once you get home, Netflix is there, your friends and family are there, your roommates are there, and of course, they might be tempting or distracting you from getting in the way of getting your studying done. If you are taking summer classes, treat this like a 6-credit class at a minimum. The LSAT weighs more heavily in law school admissions than your undergraduate GPA does, yet people typically don't devote nearly as much effort to it as their college classes do. Of course, your college classes, they're scheduled, they're defined, you have to go somewhere, but unless you're taking an LSAT course, it's not going to have the same urgency because you just have your test date on the calendar, but maybe nothing scheduled in the interim. And so block off time in your schedule, a 3-hour chunk here, a 4-hour chunk there. If you don't have class Fridays, maybe you carve out time on Fridays. Of course, there is always the weekend for those of you who are working full-time or taking classes during the week, but carve out the time, make it happen. People really do underestimate just how long this takes. People typically want to devote maybe 2 to 3 months overall, but it usually takes 5 to 6 months in order for you to reach your fullest potential. So carve out the time. You don't want to be one of these people who keeps postponing the LSAT exam after exam or cancels and has to keep retaking. That happens to a lot of folks, and that's okay. It might take a few tries for you to reach your fullest potential, but in the interest of helping you avoid extending your LSAT studying for the next 6 to 12 months and just getting it out of the way, ideally by the end of this fall, at the end of this calendar year, if at all possible, devote at least 15 to 20 hours per week. And people will ask me, how many hours should I devote per day or per week? I'm giving you my minimum, but think about it. Michael Phelps doesn't ask how many hours a week should he practice swimming to become an Olympic gold medalist or whatever he achieved. Ultimately, you've just got to put in the time. Don't burn out, but more time is typically better, at least up to a point. Carve out the time, use the study plans. They really are meant to help you structure your studying and so that you're not just spinning your wheels, but also make sure that you take the off days, take those breaks as well. You don't want to burn out. Now, I'm going to share a few quick thoughts on prepping for test day specifically, both with regard to stress reduction and avoiding silly mistakes. And then I'll talk a bit about digital LSAT prep specifically. So first off, in terms of stress reduction, don't make it all about one particular LSAT test date. The LSAT as a whole is incredibly important, but no one particular LSAT test date will make or break you. And of course, for the July LSAT, it's kind of nice. They're letting you see your score before deciding whether to cancel. And so that might help reduce some of the stress that you have associated with the July LSAT in particular. But in general, just know that it's no big deal to cancel a score, but there's also never really a reason to cancel because law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. They only take the highest. So if July doesn't go well for you, you do have the LSATs in the fall, for example, September, October, and November. And if you're taking in September, just know that you do have October, November, just 1 month or 2 months away after that. And so one thing you might do to mitigate the stress associated with one particular LSAT test date is register for the next one even if you don't plan to take it, even if you don't think you'll need it, you can always postpone, you can always withdraw, and law schools will never know that you were registered for that LSAT test date. Yes, it does cost an extra $200, but for the peace of mind, it may be worth it for you. Also know that if you do, let's say you're taking September and you've got October, November, just a month or two away, you'll only have to stay fresh on the LSAT for another 4 to 8 weeks or so, depending on when you retake, in order to do your retake. And so it's not, the stakes are not massively high in terms of being registered, in terms of taking a future LSAT. It is just another month or two beyond. And withdrawals do not count towards the new LSAT retake limits. For those of you who don't know, LSAC just announced some new retake limits. They previously, you would take the LSAT an unlimited number of times. That's no longer the case. They're concerned about test reuse because they're, given that the fact they're offering the LSAT far more frequently now than they used to, they are actually reusing a lot of old test forms that were unreleased. And so they want to minimize the number of people who encounter an exam they've seen before. So in order to eliminate or at least reduce that risk, they are limiting retakes. Going forward, starting with the September LSAT, you can only take it 3 times in one testing cycle. Testing cycles run from June to May of the following year. You can only take it 5 times over a 5-year period and only 7 times in your life, I believe. And once you've taken a 180, once you've gotten a 180, you can't retake it again over the next 5 years, within a 5-year period, which is how long your LSAT scores are valid for on your testing record. Long story short, withdrawals do not count towards the retake limit. Postponements do not count towards the retake limit, but cancellations do. So if you actually take the exam and you sit for it, that will count towards the retake limit. LSAC claims this will only affect, these new limits will only affect about 1% of test takers. I'm not sure how high the number will be, but it's not really something to worry too much about. It's also kind of saving you from yourself in a way, because you don't want to get addicted to taking this exam and end up taking it just every single time over the course of a year. It is too much. At a certain point, you do want to move on with your life, not like me, where I keep talking about the LSAT for the past nearly 15 years already. So bringing it back to test day now, again, like I said, don't make it all about one LSAT test date. While the LSAT as a whole is important, no one particular test date will make or break you, because there are always future opportunities. And in the moment, during the test, don't get bogged down on any one particular question. They're all worth the same, and there could be easier questions later in the section. Logical reasoning, for example, has a general order of difficulty, but not a perfect order of difficulty. So sometimes the last few questions in a section will actually be a little bit easier than the ones in the 15 through 23 band or so. So personally, I'll flag maybe 3 or 4 questions within a logical reasoning section to come back to later. And I just try to work at a fast enough speed where I will have a time bank of maybe 3 to 5 minutes to go back and tackle those tougher ones later. This pacing strategy may not work for everybody, but it's worked pretty well for me and for a lot of my students as well. So again, don't think that any of those tough questions are the end of the world if you can't get them. Sometimes coming back to it later will give you a fresh perspective and help you break out of your previous tunnel vision. Now, in terms of silly mistakes, you do have to bring a government ID to the testing center. It must not be expired. It cannot be your university ID. It must be a government issued ID, like a driver's license or a passport or a non-driver state ID. If your name on your government ID does not match the name on your LSAC admission ticket, contact LSAC immediately. You can always email them at lsacinfo@lsac.org, and they will help you resolve this, but do it sooner rather than later. It's not as if on test day they're answering emails at 7:59 a.m. before the test begins. If you have any questions or concerns about what to bring to the test center, what you can bring, what you can't bring, issues with your ID, email them now. And if it's an issue about bringing medication or something like that, and LSAC says it's okay, print out that email and bring it with you to the test center to help you potentially avoid any issues with the proctors. Of course, there are no guarantees. The proctors are only human, and they're doing this part-time as independent contractors, I believe, most likely. So there's no guarantees with them, but at least bringing an email printout could reduce the likelihood of having an issue. With the paper LSAT, don't wait until the end of the section to bubble. Don't wait until the 35-minute mark, because the proctors may forget to give you the 5-minute warning, and there could be issues with the precision of the timing. On the digital LSAT, of course, this is not an issue, but for those taking July, you could still be getting paper. Make sure you don't wait till the end to bubble. In general, don't focus on other people at the test center. Don't talk to other people at the test center. You never know what they could say that could throw you off. People sometimes brag sometimes, or they just say things that are plain not true, and you don't need that stress. So just be off in your own corner. It's not your job to counsel them or give them advice or anything like that. It might sound selfish, but this is your day, and it's up to you to make it happen for yourself. And part of that involves not getting wrapped up in other people's problems. So just stick with yourself, bring some warm-up problems to the test center, maybe photocopies or printouts of actual LSAT problems that you've done before, and don't find it especially difficult. Bring them with you, maybe do them in the car or do them at a coffee shop nearby or in the lobby, depending on where you're at. And then, of course, throw them out before you enter the test center. It's nice to warm up a little bit, and so that the first questions you're doing on test day are not the actual ones that count. Don't try anything new on the test itself as well. So use all the strategies that you've been using up to this point with your timed exams. And by the way, I do recommend, like I put in the chat here, do at least a few exams. Ideally, you've done a half dozen, or ideally even more than that, 10 before LSAT test day, that are 5 sections under realistic test day conditions. And you have your rhythm in terms of how to handle your pacing strategies, in what order to do things, how to diagram, whether to read the question stem or the stimulus first. Don't try anything new on the day of the test itself. Do it at least once or twice in the lead up on your practice test. And since we're 2.5 weeks before July, you do have time to try out anything at all that you want to do before test day itself. And properly simulate your practice tests now to avoid a potential test day drop. So if you're being liberal with the timing, or you're taking breaks and stopping the clock, your scores might be a little bit inflated, because on test day, you can't do any of those things. So just take a timed exam on Thursday or Friday or Saturday, rest Sunday, then walk in on Monday, and just with the attitude of destroying the exam itself. Somebody asked about watches. You can bring an analog watch to the test, but no digital watches. There have recently been some issues with chronograph watches, some of the watches that are LSAT specific that different companies are selling. I would contact LSAT to ask about any particular watch to make sure that the watch is good. I think honestly, a simple $10 Casio watch you can get on Amazon is perfectly sufficient for your needs on LSAT test day. And of course, on the digital LSAT, there's a little countdown clock on the upper right of the tablet. And so there's no need for any other kind of watch at all. I do have more on LSAT test day prep on my YouTube channel, and I will share the link with you in the chat here if you're looking for more information on test day prep specifically. I got a question here on the July LSAT and the September LSAT. This person's asking, would you recommend everyone take the July LSAT because you can so easily cancel and take September instead? I'll be done with the September LSAT with my course, so I won't be really ready for the July LSAT in the way that I want. That's really up to you. In general, I would not recommend taking the LSAT just to see how you'll do as a dry run, especially with the new LSAT retake limit now. But specifically for the July LSAT in particular, because LSAT is giving folks the incentive to cancel with the free retake and with letting you see your score before deciding whether to cancel, I'd say it's really up to you. It does give you a 50-50 shot at seeing the digital format before the fall when you're taking the LSAT that you really care about. And so for that reason, if you are registered for July, you might want to go ahead and take it anyway, just to get that proctored setting sitting in the digital format. This advice would not apply to any other LSAT, only the July LSAT specifically, because the stakes are a little bit different given the nature of that exam. As far as watches with rotating bezels, yes, those should be allowed, but unfortunately, proctors don't always know what they're doing, and enforcement of things varies and is not always correct. So I wouldn't count on any sort of special fancy watch. Maybe bring a second analog basic watch just as a backup. Someone's asking about what you can bring to test day. Can you bring your own pencils, eraser, and pens? Yes, you can bring pencils. Even on the digital LSAT, you can bring pencils as well. I believe on the paper LSAT, you cannot bring pens, but you can bring erasers. As far as scratch paper, this has been an ongoing debate and question that we're all talking about continuously. LSAC has confirmed you will get a booklet of scratch paper, but I emailed them recently and they were not able or willing to confirm for me the actual number of pages, even though we're only just a few weeks out before the digital LSAT. I can't believe they're still not answering this. I have previously heard from others that they will give a booklet of 14 to 16 pages, unlined 8.5 by 11. But when I emailed LSAC, they would not confirm for me the number of pages. I'm sharing with you a screenshot of exactly what they sent me here. Test takers will receive a scratch paper booklet, but we cannot confirm the number of pages at this time. No additional scratch paper. So you do get a booklet. I did hear previously 14 to 16 pages. I know there's someone in this class right now who's going to tell me 14 to 16, something like that. I'm just showing you what I got from LSAC, and I'm guessing it'll be along the lines of 14 to 16 pages. But regardless, it should be perfectly sufficient. This same student's email, leaving in the chat, that they got an email from LSAC saying approximately 14 pages. I do think this should be perfectly sufficient. So make use of that. It's not totally unlimited, but it should be more than enough. I agree with LSAC's comments on that 14 pages should be sufficient. And by the way, while we're here, I do want to just walk through for you what the digital LSAT has looked like and what the previous iterations of the LSAT have looked like. Right now, I'm sharing with you a screenshot of the old one-page layout for LSAT logic games. This is for logic games prior to LSAT number 66, which was the June 2012 LSAT, I think. You got one page, very limited space for scratch paper. Then starting with the test 66, they switched to a two-page layout for LSAT logic games, much more space, more than enough, and certainly better than the one-page layout. But now you're getting 8.5 by 11 pages, unlined paper, and so that does change a little bit how you might want to lay out your LSAT logic games. I'm going to share with you here how I might lay out my games diagrams. I put the rules over here, the main diagram here, then individual question diagrams below. You see here like my slots for, let's say, an ordering game with 5 variables. That's what it might look like. You do have plenty of space, more than enough. One thing you should know for the digital LSAT specifically is that you're not going to be able to see multiple questions at a time. In fact, you will only be able to see one question at a time, nothing more than that. And I do want to share for you here what that might look like if I can get my screen sharing to work properly here. Bear with me one moment. I apologize for the delay here. There we go. All right, so screen sharing for the digital LSAT, what it looks like. We've got here the fact that, let's say for a logical reasoning question, you have your stimulus and you have your answer choices, but it's only a single question at a time. You don't get the entire two-page layout spread for games or reading comprehension. You can't see the entire thing at once. Unfortunately, it's not ideal. And you can see here for reading comp what it looks like. You have your passage, you have your question, but you have to scroll down to see the entire passage. You could change your view to see the passage only, but in that case, you're not going to be able to see the questions at the same time. So that's a little bit annoying. It's not ideal, but it could also help you by focusing on the single question at a time. In terms of other features, you have the highlighted specific variable or vocabulary word in the question, and they mirror it by highlighting it in the passage itself. Pretty cool. Other features, you can highlight, you can underline, you can highlight in multiple colors. They give you yellow, pink, and orange. If you want to maybe do something creative with that, you could. Maybe you want to highlight one major viewpoint, one color, and highlight another major viewpoint, another color. Or maybe you want to highlight keywords in the question stem to indicate that it's a certain question type, like strengthen or weaken or flaw or parallel. That could be useful too, because you can also highlight the stimulus or the question stem as well. One thing you cannot do, though, is draw freehand on the tablet the way that you might be able to on a piece of paper or on a typical tablet that you're using. Let's say if you are used to using an iPad or Samsung and you're used to using whiteboards or note-taking apps that you just draw with the stylus however you want with your handwriting, you can't do that on the digital LSAT. You are limited specifically to these tools for underlining and highlighting. You can, by the way, also erase your highlighting and your underlining, which is nice, but no drawing freehand, just something to be aware of. Other features of digital, you can increase the text size. You can decrease the text size as well. You can also increase the line spacing. These are meant to be accessibility options for those with different sight issues, perhaps. You can also increase or decrease the brightness, although it doesn't work on desktop, only on tablet. And by the way, speaking of tablet, specifically on the digital LSAT, they're using a Microsoft Surface Go 10 inches. You don't necessarily have to use that particular tablet, though, if you want to practice. Any old tablet will do. An iPad is fine. A Samsung is fine. Some folks are using an Amazon Fire because it's a lot cheaper. It's around $150, which is, of course, much more affordable than the others. And of course, if you decide that it's not for you, you can always return it after the LSAT since Amazon does have a pretty liberal return policy. I'll share the link with you for the Amazon Fire tablet here. It's around $150 or so. Another feature of the digital LSAT I should mention is that they do give you a countdown timer, which is pretty nice. I'm sharing it here again in the upper right. My video might be blocking it though, but they do have a countdown clock on the upper right with the time remaining area. Counts down from 35 minutes. You can remove it, but once you hit the 5-minute warning, you can no longer remove the countdown timer because they do want you to be aware of it. Additionally, the countdown timer pops up with the 5-minute warning when the 5-minute warning does hit, and you have to click OK to remove it. Now, when you're going into the digital LSAT, even using the practice tool, they have the directions pop up, and the timer already starts once you are looking at the directions. So on test day, don't keep looking at the directions as if it's a free time with the clock not ticking. The clock is ticking while you're looking at the directions. So you immediately do want to go on to question number 1 and continue from there. By the way, the digital LSAT familiarization tool is at familiar.lsac.org. I'll put the link for you in the chat here. They're currently giving you 3 different LSATs to play around with on LSAC's site currently. They're giving you LSAT 71, 73, and 74 currently, and they will be adding more in the lead up to the fall, they say. They started off with offering only test 73, and now they're also giving you 71 and 74 as well to practice on in the digital format. So if you haven't completed these already, I would recommend using a tablet, if at all possible, to practice with it. And so on test day, you will be using a tablet. You will not be using a desktop computer. You can, of course, look at these digital LSAT practice questions on the computer or even on a smartphone, although it's not very smartphone compatible. But ideally, you want to use a tablet to practice with it and use a stylus as well, since you'll be using, or at least have the option to use a stylus on test day. On test day, you'll have a stylus that is also a pen on the other end. And so you actually can use a pen for the digital LSAT when using your scratch paper. And so if you don't have a stylus, I would recommend getting one. You can get an Amazon Basics one for under $10, I believe. So I know I've said a lot so far on the digital LSAT. I'm happy to answer any questions at all that you have on the digital LSAT or anything else I've covered up to this point. One other thing I should include about the fact that you can see only one question at a time is a way to simulate that with your test books is just cut out a rectangle in a piece of paper and then overlay it on top of a practice problem to limit your field of vision to only one single question. This is really a really simple lo-fi solution, but it is quite effective. And I know that, of course, most exams that you're completing are in books or you're using PDFs. And so if you're using books, use this little trick of cutting out a rectangle. And if you're using PDFs, that's fine, but treat them like they're the digital LSAT, meaning that you're just using your scratch paper to the side, and treat your books as if they were digital as well, meaning as if they were a screen, meaning that you could not write on your books. Use your scratch paper instead. Any just 8.5 by 11 paper is perfectly fine. And while LSAC is probably going to limit you to 14 to 16 pages or so, you don't have to limit yourself in that way, but just know that, of course, it's not going to be unlimited. Anyway, I have said a lot on a lot of different topics, and I want to make sure that I'm addressing any questions that you have. Someone's asking, is it going full digital for all US tests after July, or is it a longer transition? Great question. After July, meaning starting with the September LSAT, it will be fully digital in North America. There is no anticipated transition beyond that. The plan is September and beyond, fully digital in North America. Those overseas, those in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and other places will still be getting paper and pencil for the foreseeable future, for at least the next couple of years. But I do expect that eventually, 5-10 years from now, it will be digital overseas as well. Someone's asking about the order of approach for LSAT problems in logic games. Of course, with the paper format, you might want to jump around a bit, do orientation questions, then local, then global. For digital, might you want to change that order? Yeah, you might. You could simply click with arrows left and right to jump around as you want. That is a little bit of work, but it might be worth it for you if you still want to do things in a certain particular order of local, then global. Or let's say in reading comprehension, you might want to do main point and primary purpose questions first, then detail-oriented questions, then inferential questions later. So there's a slight advantage to going in order now relative to how it used to be, but you have to weigh and measure it. I'd say play around and see what works best for you. Is it okay for you to simply go in order, or do you find it helpful to jump around? I think that, honestly, my opinion is that it will still be worth jumping around, especially since it's fairly easy to jump around on the digital LSAT. They have, and I'll go back and show you this in a moment, there is a little kind of navigation bar below the questions. No, I'll pull it up here in a moment. You see on the bottom, they have numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you can click to question 5 immediately, click back to question 3, and we're jumping around. As you can see, I'm jumping from question to question, and if you flag a question, it'll appear flagged on the bottom, which is pretty cool, meaning that, let's say you go on to question 5, you'll be able to see, oh yeah, I flagged question 4. I do want to go back to that question. You can even jump there immediately without having to use the left and right arrows. So that's pretty cool. And of course, this extends for an entire 25 question section, all this flagging and jumping around. So that's pretty nice. Somebody asks, does the test alert you to unanswered problems? Your alert will simply be that the question has not been bubbled in. When you bubble in a question, it will automatically appear bubbled on the nav bar below. And by the way, I should have mentioned that you can also eliminate certain answer choices and it will appear grayed out. You can also collapse the answers, any answers at all, but in particularly you might want to collapse the answers you've grayed out if you no longer want to be looking at them and no longer considering them. But right now I'm on question 4 and questions 1 through 3 are still empty, unbubbled, have not yet been filled in. And so that's my only alert that those are yet to be completed. Someone else is asking, will they add the ability to draw freehand on the tablet later in the future to mark up the passage or mark off your answer choices on the question itself, or make diagrams next to the questions on the screen on the tablet versus on paper? I have not heard of any plans to add that feature. I think it would be really cool. And LSAC, if you're watching, I hope that you consider this idea for the future, because I do think one of the biggest benefits of a tablet is actually being able to draw on the thing the way you would on a piece of paper. But LSAC, for now, is going with a more confined and limited framework for the digital LSAT. They are not adding the ability to draw freehand as far as I've heard. I haven't heard any plans to add that in the future, although who knows, maybe 10, 20 years from now, they will add those features. But LSAC moves pretty slowly and deliberately in general. They've been studying the computerized LSAT for several years, coming up with study after study. As for my entire career, there were even studies back in the early 2000s talking about this, and in the mid 2000s with studying the digital LSAT moving to a computerized format. But I think really they sped things up in part due to competition with the GRE. Someone's asking, does it save the collapsed and removed answers when you go between questions, or does it reset if you go back? I know that for the annotation tools, it leaves them remaining. So let's say I highlight number 4, I go on to number 5, I go back to number 4, that's still highlighted. And as you can see, the collapsing and graying out is still there. So the answer is yes, it does save the annotations and other things you've done to a question when you go back to it later. One thing you should note, though, is that you cannot highlight and underline the same text at the same time. You can only do one or the other, and you can't combine different colored highlighting. So I can't combine yellow and pink and make some new color, whatever that might be. It's limited simply to one particular annotation tool. But as you'll see, if I collapse or eliminate choices, they will be eliminated. If I go back to 5 and then go back to number 2, those are still eliminated, and the highlighting and underlining does still appear there. So they do want to at least give you the chance to go back with all the markings that you've made. Personally, I don't see these underlining and highlighting features as being enormously useful. I do think the collapsing and flagging and eliminating is useful, but the highlighting and underlining, not so much. Somebody's asking, would it be better to focus more on digital prep or do 50-50 paper and digital leading up to July? That's really up to you. If you've been studying for several months with paper format, you might already have enough paper practice under your belt to the point where you might want to make the majority of your prep digital going forward. If, on the other hand, you feel very comfortable with digital and you actually like it better, then maybe you want to spend more time working on paper. I was talking with a student yesterday who tried out the digital for the first time and loved it. She said, I'm really used to using smartphones and tablets, and I found it really easy and I liked it better. And so I said to her, that's great. In that case, maybe you want to do majority paper prep because that's what you like less. So it's really up to you. I'd say for the average person, doing maybe 50-50 paper digital, if you're taking July where your odds are 50-50, is probably a pretty safe way to go. But of course, you know yourself best. And so whatever you would like to encounter least, that's probably what you should focus on. As far as how LSAC will handle internet outages during testing, oh man, Cody, don't stress everyone else out with your worst case scenarios. As far as tech issues, sorry. Yeah, it's okay. I'm joking. This is a reasonable question to ask because of course, tech issues could and do happen sometimes. And of course, that's not ideal. First off, I would say mindfulness, take a deep breath. It is, of course, relatively early in the cycle. And so you do have full LSATs available to you in the future if something goes terribly wrong in July. My understanding of digital is that LSAC is using some sort of a hub system where it might not be internet connected to the entire internet, but is also being connected to a local hub at the testing center. So if we're speaking of the internet as the World Wide Web, that's probably not the big concern. If there's some general tech issue, either with your particular tablet or with some sort of network connectivity at the test, of course, let LSAC know. I'm sure the proctors will let them know as well, and they will make some sort of accommodations, which is most likely simply giving you a free future retake in the fall. They probably can't do much more for you than that, but LSAC also, of course, is not looking to offer the LSAT every single day. And so if something goes wrong in July, whether it's technical or technological, or if it's a power outage or the marching band playing outside the testing center or a fire alarm going off, typically what they do in those situations is they say, we're sorry, things happen, and they'll just give you a free retake in the fall. Someone's asking about score release. Will scores come out faster since it is a digital LSAT, or will it be the typical timeline? And the answer is actually neither, at least for July. For the July LSAT in particular, because they are transitioning to the new testing format, they're actually going to take longer to release scores. Those of you taking the LSAT on July 15th will not get your scores back until August 28th. I can hear you all collectively groaning and sighing because that is terrible that they would make you wait 6+ weeks to get your score back. And the reason is simply that they're doing all sorts of complicated statistical analyses comparing digital LSAT scores to paper LSAT scores and making sure that everything worked out as expected in terms of the curve, aka the raw score conversions, how people performed on digital versus paper. And so those of you taking July, you won't get back until August 28th. That delay is unique to July though. For the digital LSAT going forward, the anticipated score release is the same as it has always been, which is approximately 3 weeks later. And could they feasibly give you your score back immediately? Yeah, they probably could. Or could they at least give you a raw score calculation of how many you got right out of 100 questions or 101 or 102? They could do that. And I'm guessing they may do that long-term in the future because it wouldn't be hard for them to do. But LSAC is very careful and deliberate and scientific for how they go about things. And for that reason, for every LSAT, whether paper or digital, they do want to allow themselves a few weeks to make sure that the questions performed as anticipated with the testing population, meaning that a level 4 difficulty question performed as one would expect a level 4 difficulty question to perform in terms of how many 170 plus scorers got this right versus 130 scorers and everything in between and beyond. So the typical timeline for score release will long-term still be approximately 3 weeks. Maybe in the long term, they will shorten it or give you scores immediately, but there is no immediate plan to do that. Probably nothing that will impact those of you taking the LSAT in the next couple of years. So I hope that addresses those questions. Anyway, I've said a lot. Once again, happy to open it up to further questions on anything else at all, whether digital LSAT or otherwise. In the meantime, I do want to share with you a few free and low-cost resources that I've put together for you. One of them is, of course, the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel, available at youtube.com/LSATblog. I'm putting out new videos every single day on everything, digital LSAT, paper LSAT, different section content. I have playlists on logic games, logical reasoning, reading comprehension, test day prep, retake prep, recordings of my in-person prep classes here in New York City. I have discussions and interviews with law school admissions professionals, a former LSAT question writer, actual coaching sessions with actual LSAT students, recordings of online LSAT classes like this one, and then, of course, as you can see, many new videos coming out every single day. So plenty on that. I have other resources for you as well that I'll share in just a moment. I've got for you here a page with free LSAT prep information on my website, the LSAT blog. So I'm putting the link for you right here. I've also got schedules, which I shared the link for already. I'll share it again just in case. I have free week-by-week ones. I have premium day-by-day ones for all different study timelines. I also have the LSAT Unplugged podcast available on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, and pretty much everywhere else. I have the free LSAT course, or I shared the link with you, and hopefully it'll be working later. I've also got on-demand LSAT courses, which include both on-demand video courses covering the basics for every single LSAT section, as well as LSAT test day, and then my live online LSAT classes where you can actually attend live classes with me and get your questions answered. I also have Q&A sessions, and I have guest experts on every now and then as well. So that's a great resource for you. They're an alternative to the $1,000 paid courses. They're simply monthly, pay as you go, cancel anytime, big library of recorded content, lots of information there. So that's pretty much everything I wanted to share with you today. I appreciate you all for coming. I know it's hot here, at least in New York. And so I appreciate you making the investment in yourselves on a Friday afternoon. I'm happy to stick around if you have any other questions at all. Otherwise, I want to thank you all for coming. I'll wish you all the best as you move forward with your prep. Please feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward. I'm happy to help however I can. I read every single email I receive and try to answer every single one as well. So again, everyone, thanks for coming. I'll wish you all the best with your prep. In the meantime, take care.